So we made it. We made it to Post Mills, one of my favorite like grass airports.
I can see why. I'm blown away. I didn't know what to expect. The sim obviously didn't give much away in terms of how the place would really feel once we got here, but this is just flat out beautiful. This was definitely worth the trip. All right, leaving Manchester, they were recording in ATIS, so it's going to happen to you once in a while that you tune the ATIS and bupkis, just nothing happens. Right. And if you wait for long enough and it's just dead silence, but it's clearly transmitting. It was transmitting dead air. I could hear that. So you said, just call them negative ATIS, and you're absolutely right. So, so that went well, and we got our VFR departure instructions. It was lacking a heading, and you never know if you're going to get a standard departure heading from the clearance controller, from the ground controller, or last minute from the tower. It turns out that at Manchester, on this day at least, the heading came last minute from the tower. So on to the cross country.
Yeah, let's definitely go to the cross country.
How fun was that?
It was awesome.
It was so much fun working out our timing and the heading and the wind correction, dealing with the updrafts and downdrafts, and acquiring the landmarks, making adjustments to the landmarks.
Right.
The time flew. We were only doing 90 knots over the ground, and it didn't feel like a slow flight to me. The pacing was actually just right for me.
And all the times that you got off course, you did error capture, right? You were like, well, what's that? Well, where am I? Well, which side of my course line am I on? So it's beautiful. You kept drifting. The winds were more out of the north than you were thinking,
okay.
I think is what happened. So we kept, drifting to the west of our course line. You would catch things and say, I'm too far to the left. I need to correct back to the right and get back on course. And then you had no trouble really finding Post Mills.
Sort of, yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, actually, to your point about the waypoints along the way, the sectional speaks to you. If you let it speak to you, there is so much data there. And I find that people don't really zoom in and take the time to, you don't just say, oh, there's a bunch of lakes over there. Well, yeah, there are 3 lakes with 3 distinct shapes, and that has a V right there, and there's a road right there, and there's a town right there. And if you just spend the extra 5 seconds to really zoom in and take in what it's saying, there's an amazing amount of detail there. So we were very easily able to discern one lake from another, and I'd never seen those lakes before, and we didn't prepare ahead of time for this. I found that to be really satisfying. It's nice to be self-reliant. I enjoyed not having the GPS. I enjoyed not knowing my ground speed, and it couldn't have been more satisfying. I absolutely loved that flight.
So let's talk about coming into Post Mills.
Okay.
I've been in here before, so I have my own ways of thinking about it, but I don't want to sully your experience in any way.
Right.
You did do it in the sims, and we brought out, some of those things. We actually landed in a different direction in the sim.
We did.
And, so that was a little different. But tell me about coming into Post Mills. Obviously, it all worked out really well, but, where were the stumbling points? What were you thinking? How did you deal?
Yes. So what surprised me was, once again, it seemed like we got there sooner than expected. Looking at the sectional, I thought the airport was considerably further away from those roads, the major road at the Vermont-New Hampshire border. I thought we had more time than that. And it turned out we didn't, because I soon acquired the lakes in question. First lake I acquired turned out to be a very small lake, and Lake Fairley, I think, is really the closest lake here. That finally came into view and definitely got that identified. And I thought, okay, the airport must be on the southwest corner of that. I then acquired the dirt racing track, which we got from the satellite imagery. So looking at that satellite imagery definitely boosted my confidence and said, okay, it must be in there. But truth be told, I still couldn't see the runway. I hadn't put 2 and 2 together. I didn't see those bright little specks are all airplanes. Had I been more alert to that, I think I would have said, okay, those are the airplanes, there's the dirt track, and that field of nothing is the field.
Right.
And I didn't have my head around the fact that it was just going to be a field of nothing. It's not going to look exactly like a paved airport.
On the idea of the satellite image as well, on the satellite image there's a large green-topped building and a small white church as well, which I actually had meant to point out to you, and I forgot. And it's funny that I didn't, because if I had, you probably would have picked up the airport even sooner.
Yes.
Those 2 things show up against the green landscape. There's a different color green on the top of the building. They really show up in relief, particularly that white church.
Got it.
And there's a road right between the 2 of them, and you're being like, white church, green building, road.
Right.
That's it. That's the threshold.
There we go.
Runway 22.
Exactly.
Right there.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for telling me that after we land. That's awesome. So once we're over the lake, it was time to start the power reduction and come down in a controlled fashion. It was a conscious decision to descend them. My instinct was to sort of stay high and circle and work this all out. But I was doing the math on, okay, we're at 4,500 feet. We've got some serious descending to do. So once I was over the lake and I had the general idea of where the field was, pulled the power, started the descent, and started angling for that 45. And as I got closer and closer to what surely was the airport, it really did become the airport. I could start making out where the runway was, made that call for the 45, maybe slightly early, but we did get the call in time, and then entered the right downwind. Radio calls were okay, I thought, and the couple of interesting things did happen on the base. I lost the airport. I think the altitudes were okay, maybe even slightly high for a standard pattern. It would have been slightly high based on how much I had to slip on final.
Right.
But it was slightly low for the situation because that terrain was obscuring the airport. I fell back on my sim trick, which was, there was a very good reason I had the HSI set to runway heading as well as the heading bug. To square up that base and give myself some time, I basically just flew the heading, got that HSI horizontal, and that is a reasonable approximation of base. So I stayed on the base, stayed the course. I said, oh, there's terrain blocking what must be the airport, but I knew exactly where that terrain was in relation to the airport because of the work we'd done on the sim. Also, while we were on the downwind, I observed that hill. So although I temporarily lost the airport, I knew where I was in relation to the terrain that was obscuring the airport, if that made sense. And I had a good feeling, fingers crossed, the airport would pop out not long after we cleared the terrain.
So if it were me coming into, you're really coming into an uncontrolled kind of environment, right? It's a grass field, there are animals. We had people walking across the runway at one point, you know, at the far end in landing. Even when I thought I had the airport, I would have passed over the field directly to do a full check and
get the lay of the land.
Lay of the land, any windsocks, make sure there wasn't a tree that came down in last night's storm. I mean, there are all sorts of possibilities for that blind piece of runway. The other thing you would have seen if you did that was that how the hill is off the end of runway 4 like that. And if you were low enough not to have to slip, you would have been pulling brush out of your wheels from going through the trees. So a squared off final requires a not heroic maneuver, but a non-standard maneuver. Whereas from above you could say, if I can't my final approach by even just 10 degrees, maybe 5 degrees, a little bit beyond the runway, I can have an unobstructed view and see full length down the runway on final approach.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yep.
And so coming into an airport that has unusual obstructions like that, sometimes it helps to play a little bit looser with a standard pattern, and you wouldn't have been right over the hill if the winds really were blowing harder on that hill. I was waiting to see if this happened. We would get an updraft coming over that hill right at the moment that we realized we were too high. You try and make a heroic effort, you touch down halfway down the runway, and you can see if we had rolled off the end of the runway here, we actually roll onto a public road. Right?
Yep.
So it's one of those things into an unfamiliar area, particularly at smaller fields. I like to get the lay of the land, and then I come back around, enter the right downwind, and say, okay, I'm feeling good.
As you were talking, my instinct was to say, you can just work all this stuff out on final, and it's actually not true. There wouldn't have been time. I was at capacity, managing the energy. We had a bit too much energy, and it took a while to get that resolved. There really wasn't time to do a whole lot of processing. The people I saw when you said, there's the people. Had you not said it, there's a chance that I would have been so busy, I may not have even scanned that end of the runway.
Right. But the landing itself, how did that go? Once we slipped down, we got
what a blast. It was fun. I took all I had to not just yell out, woohoo. Once I realized it was all going to work and we were going to live, I was a little concerned that we were going to be floating for a while. The speed was about 5 knots faster than I wanted. The slip sorted out most of it, but not all of it. We still were a little bit fast. Yeah, if we had been a little lower, it would have felt uncomfortable on the base, but really, if you took the hill out of the way, we were high, which was why we needed to do so much of a slip. So as you had said, a different approach canted from the other side would have given us a better straight and probably could have managed the energy better.
Exactly, and if it had been a 2,000-foot field instead of a 2,900-foot field, that would have been much more important. Had this been truly short, then you wouldn't have been able to do both that heroic slip or semi-heroic slip and been able to deal with not running, deal with the float. That's why this is a great field to work on that, because you've got that nice buffer.
Yes. If anyone lives in the Northeast and is thinking about getting into grass operations, I've been to a few. This is definitely on the top 1 or 2 from the 4 or 5 that I've visited. Definitely worth a visit.